back.
I am Zazubaar, returning from a long silence here on YouTube. Well, I did do that Fantastic Four review, but prior to that, it's been a while since I've done a solo video, and regardless of the solo videos, the podcasts lately have been going up super sparsely and not on a regular schedule prior to this past month, and then not at all for this past month. So I figured it's probably been way overdue for me to come on here on video and explain what the fuck is going on. And tonight, because it's nighttime as I'm recording this, I figured I would come on and explain where the hell I've been, apologize for the fact that I haven't been here, and I do apologize for that, I'm very sorry. Give some of the reasons why that was and why I've been absent from YouTube for the past month or so, and then of course in the style of an update video, update on what we're going to be doing as we move into the future. So first and foremost, yeah, I'd like to apologize for the fact that it's been a while since this channel has produced regular content, and I'm not terribly thrilled that happened, but what ended up happening, to get real basically, is that, you know, personally, for the past half a year or so, doing all this YouTube stuff hasn't really been, not a priority, because calling it a priority has always seemed strange to me, but it hasn't been as sort of, I haven't been as excited and really wanted to do it as much as I did when I was younger, and for the time when I got into it and just all the years of doing it, I just didn't feel the same way about it. It didn't, I don't want to say it felt like work, because it didn't feel like work. It felt, I didn't really necessarily feel like I was putting my best into it, and that doesn't feel good. You're not really supposed to do that. So, you know, been feeling that way for a while now, and then recently just different things have happened in my personal life and just overall that have made it all the more difficult to produce regular YouTube content, or just haven't made me want to produce regular YouTube content, including the podcasts. And I don't want to say that I felt like I was getting sick of it, but I will say that I definitely felt burnt out, and that I definitely felt kind of, not like I was producing too much, but that I was sort of losing the drive to continue. And there was a little bit for the past month or so where I was kind of going, is this a thing I want to continue to do? And the thing that's kept me going, of course, has been that I've had some success doing this, and I have enjoyed it, and it's produced good things, and I've had people who, you know, watch my stuff and get some enjoyment out of it. So that's the kind of stuff that makes me go, okay, I should probably get back into doing this, because there is something of worth to do here and to experience here. And I'd like to get back into doing it regularly, because it's fun and I want to have fun again. So to that end, in terms of wanting to have fun with doing it again, wanting it to feel fresh and exciting again, I think that here on YouTube, here on Zazubaar, I think it's time to change some things up a little bit, and I think it's time to do some different stuff that, not necessarily that's completely different from what I was doing before, that's a little bit more refined, a little bit more fine-tuned, and kind of focus on different things that I wasn't focusing on before, try and put some effort into it. So, to that end, when I return, and I will return, and we'll get into when and how and all that good stuff a little bit later, I am going to be changing up some things with the videos that I produce and with the podcast that I produce, more to the point that I figured this video would be a good place to expound upon the changes and when certain things are coming back and when they aren't. So, since the podcast, the SOS Network podcasts, are going to be the things that are going to be impacted the most by my return to YouTube, and things that will be different because of this time I've taken off and because of this past year of events, let's expound upon that now. So, podcasts. Sons of Serizawa podcast and the Demons from Outer Space. It's been a while since we've done them on the reg, and even, again, prior to that, they weren't coming up when they were supposed to anyway. So, in order to reinvigorate my own interest in doing them, and again, not that I wasn't interested in doing them before this, but just to make it feel fresh and new again, and try and make the podcasts better, is more of the point. And that's really the whole point of all this, is to produce better content and to just make something fun and good. And not that we weren't before, but to do it better, to do it more efficiently. And so, to that end, we're going to be making some changes to the podcast for that reason and for some other reasons, which I will not get into in great detail. So, let's start off with SOS. Since we started that one first, that was the first podcast that we've done, and we've been doing it for 2 years now. And yes, I am aware that we passed the 2-year mark. And I am disappointed that we didn't get to do a podcast to commemorate it, but again, that was because I wanted to take some time off. So I figured that missing it isn't really a big deal. We'll come back to it when we do bring the podcast back, which again we are, and I'll get into that in a second. And we'll acknowledge it, we'll celebrate it, and I feel like this new direction for the podcast and the new sort of refined nature of it will be a good way to celebrate that 2-year mark. So we are going to acknowledge it. We're not just going to pretend that like, oh, we're still just doing this and we didn't pass the 2-year mark and we didn't miss the 2-year mark. We'll address it, we'll get into it on the episode when we bring it back. So don't you worry about that. So 2 years of SOS. So what have we learned in 2 years? That's the question. No, not much, as it turns out. So 2 years of SOS. Here we are, bringing it back to change it after a little break. So basically, it's not gonna be radically different. I'm not saying that. When we were sort of discussing how exactly the podcast was going to be different after I decided I want to take this time off and bring it back, we were kicking around the word reboot because it's going to be different, but I was just like, yeah, but we're not like starting a new numbering system. Like we're going to keep the podcast numbered the same way. So it's almost like a soft reboot where it's like this is still in that same series, it's still the same show, it's just a little bit different now. It's kind of like a DC Comics reboot or a Marvel Comics reboot. We're not retconning because everything still happened, because it's not a fiction where we can go back and say certain things didn't happen. They happened, damn it. We recorded them. I was there. So this is more of like, we acknowledge that we did all that. Now we're doing it the same way, but a little different, but it's still the same thing you know and love. So we'll call it a soft reboot, but when we start uploading it, we're just going to call it the Sons of Serizawa podcast number whatever in the title. So we're going to do that the same way. But things will be different in the style of a soft reboot. So how are things going to be different? Well, number one, the roster of SOS is going to look a little different, and those are the things that I'm not going to get into now for reasons. So won't be the same roster. Won't go into too much detail on that now, just because you'll see when we bring it back, and you'll see when we start putting up little promos or whatever when we get closer. So I won't get too much into that now, but it's just going to be 4 of us from now on. Again, you'll see which 4 when we bring the shows back, and some of you will have probably already picked up on who's not there and who's there. So those of you who do pick up upon that, good for you. I didn't mean that facetiously. That sounded really facetious, like, good for you, you have a brain. That's not what I meant, but you'll pick up on it, and I just wanted to let you guys know, for those of you who do pick up on it, the reasons have nothing to do with this YouTube stuff or with our experiences with you guys or anything that has anything to do with the YouTube stuff and with the podcasts. So it has nothing to do with that. They're entirely for personal reasons, so it has no bearing on this. So we're not going to get into it, and we probably won't ever. It's weird because it's like I read and watch all this stuff about sort of not celebrities, but, you know, people in the media who interact with each other. And when bad blood or anything happens between two of them, it's always just like, well, I'm not going to talk about it because, you know, you don't deserve to know. And that's not what I mean when I say that. It's, I think the reasons why they do it and the reasons why I'm going to take up with that is just because it doesn't have a bearing on this, really, and the more we bring it up, the worse of an impact it will have on the media in which we are known for, in which we are playing around in. Words get weird. So we don't want to bring it up so that way it doesn't have a bear on that any more than it needs to. Because again, it's gonna, you'll see when we bring back the podcast, obviously I'm not gonna lie and say it's gonna be the exact same thing with these changes, but the more we brought it up, the uglier it would get, and the more of an impact it would have on that podcast and on the work than it needs to. That's my take on it. So that's what I'm applying to this situation, and that's all I'm ever going to explain about it. So I don't mean to be a man of mystery, but it's not really that mysterious. But it's just, I just don't want it to have a bearing effect on this stuff. So past this, I don't think it will, and I think in a few months things will be totally normal, regardless of this change, and I think we'll move on to something better. So, roster change, again, you will notice, just to get back to the point of all this, and it'll just be 4 podcasters from now on SOS, no more 5 groups, and someone will be missing, and you'll see when the podcast goes up, followed by remembering the explanation that I just gave. So hopefully that's enough for all of you guys. If you're not satisfied with that, I totally understand, but you know, what are you gonna do? Life's life. We know what we know. So, moving on to other changes to SOS. Again, I'm not gonna get into all of them now. I'd like some of them to be surprises when the show comes back. I think that'll kind of, because we're playing around with things a little bit. I want to find out if it's gonna work the way I want it to. And I don't want to give away too much of the changes prior to the podcast, because again, we haven't even recorded a podcast in the new style yet. With these changes in mind, so we're not entirely sure what's going to happen, and I'll outline these changes for now so that we don't have to get into them again when we bring back the podcast. We probably will for a lot of it, but the more I give away now, I also feel like the more it'll bear on that first podcast we bring back. So I'll just get into basic stuff. So, barring the roster change, we are also going to have somewhat of a structure now. Yeah, I know. The podcast where we always boasted about how, oh, we don't have a structure, we don't have a topic, we just come on here and we ramble. We're going to have a little bit of a structure. But as you'll notice, I think, it's a structure that will sort of complement the free-form nature of the podcast. We're still going to have the premise of it's 4, in this case, Godzilla fans, coming on the Skype shooting the shit about nothing. Except now we're going to have a strong foundation for that and a backbone for that. So that way, in my estimation, what that does is ensure that we always have something to talk about, and the podcasts are always listenable, in which you are able to listen to them and not be so confused or just so indifferent to the conversation that it's just not fun anymore. And I do think that we've been guilty of that at some points, and I think this will prevent that. So basically, we're going to have a little bit of a structure to the podcast now. We have not a script, but an outline for how the podcast is going to work from now on, but it was designed to complement what we already have, which I think you'll see. Some of the names of the segments, quote unquote, that we've come up with are references to past SOS material, so I think it complements what we already had. So I don't think what's going to happen is that our podcast is just going to evolve, because I was concerned about this, that it was just going to evolve into one of the other run-of-the-mill structured podcast that's like a news podcast or whatever, and we just be a dime a dozen. But I feel like there's the reason why you would become a dime a dozen if you did that poorly is because that works for a lot of people. So I think that by adding that to ours in terms of just the basic idea of having a structure, will just make our podcast more professional, number one. So that's good. And number two, just work better, be more sort of refined, and get to the more quality material that we sometimes struggle to get to when we do these the way we used to do them, where it was just like, so hi guys, we're here. What do you want to talk about, guys? So without doing that now, with more of a structure, I don't think we'll have that issue. But we'll see. Again, this is all just sort of like, well, this is what we're thinking now. But it all kind of comes up to how it happens when we bring the podcast back. So everything you hear here, in terms of specific changes, are subject to change themselves, especially when we get to the dates later. So that's the other thing, is the structure that you'll notice will be different. And again, I think it'll just be better for the podcasts. Will be better. They'll be more refined. They'll be a little bit shorter. We're aiming to do that as well, to shorten them on average, because we were running 2 hours and 45 minutes on average. That's a long podcast, and a lot of the times it's really hard to fill that time. And not that we were always necessarily shooting for that, but that's a big commitment to listen to 3 hours of 5 assholes talking to each other. So we're not gonna do that anymore. We're gonna be a little bit more straight shot in, and still long form. It's still definitely gonna run around about 2 hours, but not as much of a long slog as it can sometimes be to record something like that and then to listen to something like that. And that's a general thing for all podcasts. It's not just ours. It's very difficult to do that well. And, the sort of ratio of doing it well versus not doing it well needs to be balanced, and I don't think we were. So, we're going to change it for that reason as well. So, aside from the structure, you can see I'm also running things a little bit differently now. I have a list of things I'm going to talk about on my laptop, so I'm not just sitting here like, I also meant to cover this, but fuck, what was it? No, I have a list now of things to read to you folks. So, I'm looking at my list for the next thing, which is the seasons. So, basically, we are going to start running the podcasts seasonally, like a TV show. And I don't mean like, the podcast will be specified to certain seasons, like a beer. No. What that means is we're going to start doing it like a TV show, where the podcast will be released in season form, with breaks in between the seasons. So, basically, we're going to have a fall and winter podcast and a spring and summer podcast season. So, for instance, we'll come back in September and end in the new year, and then come back in February and then end in July. So we have seasons where we're producing regular podcasts, and then once we get to the end of that season, we take a break, and then we come back just like a TV show. The difference is that our podcasts are, of course, will go 2 seasons a year. So we're gonna kind of do it like, this was the only example I could think of when pitching it to the rest of the guys, was, how the E! Network does all the Kardashian shows, where they do 2 seasons a year, where they do little kind of two micro seasons to fill out sort of 1 year's worth of shows. That's what we're doing. So basically, we get about 4 months off overall, with 2 months on average going in between each season. So season 1, it sort of also kind of lines up with semesters in school. So season 1 is September to December, and season 2 is February to July. So it's basically the same amount of time for both, with the same amount of time off for both, just like 2 semesters of school that make up 1 year. So then the 2 seasons make up 1 year's worth of podcasts, with those breaks accounted for. So we're doing that seasonally, and I've been thinking about doing this for a long time, and I just haven't, just because I didn't have a reason to. So I'm gonna start doing it now, following this hiatus, for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I think this will make the podcast better in and of itself anyway, because producing shows regularly like that, week to week, every other week, like we were doing with SOS, that you sort of get burnt out on doing it because it just becomes a regular part of your life, and you never have any time off from it unless you're like, I can't do the show this week, so we're taking a week off. And we've done that before. We've done that a couple of times. These breaks will ensure that, we don't have that anymore. I'm speaking from personal experience here. I'm sure the other guys have had this too. They don't say they are, they're lying to you. No, but I think we've all had our moments of burnout where it's like, God, if I could just get 2 weeks off. This is basically to ensure that that doesn't happen. And just like a season of television will ensure that we and you guys, the listeners, are always excited about when that season starts, and then for that quality to continue per season. It's not just one regular, like, oh, well, this week this episode was good, but next week's wasn't so good. Like I feel some podcasts can be. If we do it in a certain amount of time, for a certain time, produce a certain amount per year, I think that'll make the shows better. It'll make us more excited to do them. It'll make us more willing to put more work into them, which we are going to be doing. It's not always just going to be us showing up just like, well, we're here, let's talk. That'll, of course, be the basic thing that we do, but there will be other things thrown in that we'll have to put work into aside from that. And if giving us that time off and knowing a certain amount of podcasts we have to produce per year, per season, it'll make us more inclined to do that. So I think the podcast will be better for that as well, and it'll also ensure that we are better podcasters because we get that time off. So that way we're able to come back and give it our all for another season, and it just makes it more exciting, makes it more of an event to me. So I think that'll make the podcast better as well. So aside from that, they're pretty much going to be the same. Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the segments now, the way that it'll be structured. I will do that on the recording dates for when we bring those podcasts back, which I will get into in a second because I have those dates. Let's get into the dates for SOS right now. So it is August 20th on the day of me recording this. We're going to bring back SOS late in September. So SOS Season 3, which is how it will be labeled, because I'm going to consider the first 2 years of the podcast as years 1 and 2, seasons 1 and 2. So then this will be Season 3, and then when after we take the break for the New Year's, it'll be Season 4. So Seasons 3 and 4 of 2015 and 2016 is what you guys are going to be getting now. And of course, following this in 2016, 2017, it's going to be around the same time frame. So this is basically how the seasons for SOS and DFOS we'll do in a second will go from now on. So the Sons of Serizawa podcast will return tentatively, because I can't promise this far out and then guarantee that we'll do it the way I have planned now. So this is just tentative. But tentatively, I love that word, tentatively, SOS will return on September 28th of next month. So on September 28th, that is a Monday, and of course I am going to try and get the podcast up in a little bit more of a timely manner with this new change, because some of our fans were complaining about that, and it's fair. It took me 2 weeks to get one of them up once, so we're going to change that as well. So I'm with you guys on that. I'm going to try and make that better. So Mondays from September 28th onward, every other Monday, we will put up a new episode of the Sons of Serizawa podcast for roughly 3.5 months, because the first season, or the third season rather, of the Sons of Serizawa podcast, the rebooted edition, will conclude with this year's New Year's special. So actually on New Year's Eve this year, and I didn't mean to yell, but that's just how it came out, December 31st will be the conclusion of Season 3 of the Sons of Serizawa podcast and the fall, early winter season. Then we will have 2 months off, roughly again, and we will bring back SOS on February 8th, that is also a Monday, and do the same thing we did in the previous season. Every other Monday, there will be an episode until July, and we're going to wrap up the second part of the year with that season ending on the Road Trip to G-Fest miniseries, since I figured that made the most sense. It's the closest to where that time frame would end. I figured that would be the coolest way to conclude every year of SOS with, with the road trip to G-Fest, since that's always exciting and that's always a big event. So we're gonna make that the end of the second season in every year's worth of 2 seasons. So season 4 will end with 2016 G-Fest is basically the point. And that will be roughly around July 25th. So that'll be the end of season 4. And then every year following that, again, the dates are going to change because obviously they change year to year. It'll be a different date, but the same time frame. So late September every year, we'll bring back SOS. And then early February every year, we'll bring back SOS for the 2 seasons worth that we do every year, with New Year's and G-Fest being the capping off points to both seasons. And we're going to try and keep that up annually for as long as we're doing this podcast, which will probably be until death, maybe. I don't know. I can't see the future, because if I could, I'd be a way less anxious motherfucker. So, with that said about SOS, that's pretty much it for that particular podcast. But, of course, SOS has a red-headed little stepchild of a cousin that we like to call the Demons from Outer Space. So, I'm going to get into the changes on that show now, and then that'll be it. So, let's wrap up this video with that, and then a little surprise at the end. So, DFOS will basically go under the same changes, but will be differently applied to as SOS. So that show will now also have a structure, so that way Dylan and I won't turn to each other one night and go, dude, what the fuck are we going to talk about? Because that happens a scary amount of times. So there will be a structure for that show as well, but it will be differently angled than SOS, but it'll sort of be the same changes, but for different reasons. So on DFOS, for instance, we're going to try and start angling the show, mainly when we cover news items, towards weird science. Not the Duran Duran song, or the John Hughes movie, or the DC comic from the 40s, but the idea of unusual science as it stands as a concept. So I hope that didn't confuse anyone. But I would totally listen to a podcast that was all about weird science. Any of the weird sciences that I just named out, especially the John Hughes movie. I'd love to see how you do a regular podcast based just on that movie. Anyway, major tangent. So, DFOS, changes, dates, all that good stuff. So, that's how we're going to try and change up the podcast for DFOS a little bit. Dylan and I are going to cover science stories and other sort of real-world, unusual things that catch our interest. That's the basic tinge, the little twist that we're trying to put onto DFOS. So, I won't go into any more details than that for now, so let's just jump right into the dates, shall we? So, DFOS will return the Thursday after SOS returns, and that'll be October 3rd. Wait, that's not right, because that's not the day I'm posting them, that's the day I'm recording them. I have 2 separate dates written down here, one for the recording date and one for the release date. The release date of DFOS, and my phone just went off, I apologize for that. It's probably going to do it again because I can't walk over and turn it off right now. But the returning date for DFOS will be October 3rd, which is a Saturday, I think. So basically, it'll go, DFOS will go up on a Saturday, and then SOS will go up on a Monday. And unlike SOS, DFOS will go up weekly, of course, which is what we've been doing for the nearly 2 years that we've been doing that podcast. This November will be our 2-year anniversary, and we shall acknowledge that on the show when we're in season 3. Yes, that's also in season 3. So, DFOS will come back right after SOS and just run weekly. Now, you'll also notice that it's going to end sooner because we're ending the 3rd season of DFOS on December 24th on Christmas Eve with the 3rd edition of Motherfucking Christmas. So, every year when we do our Christmas special on DFOS, that will be the end of that season. There is a moth in my room. I thought it was a bee at first, though, so that's why I took notice. Anyway, so DFOS will end a little bit before SOS does on Christmas Eve. But I think that'll work because we produce them weekly, so there's more podcasts in a season than SOS, regardless of the fact that they're shorter seasons. And I think that as well will be better for Dylan and I and for you guys out there. So you'll take note of that as well. And we will bring back DFOS for season 4 on February 13th, which is the Saturday following when we bring back SOS, which is, I think I said it was the 6th or the 7th or the 8th. I think it's the 8th, yeah. So right after the Saturday after that is when DFOS will come back. So yeah. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought because my phone went off again and I lost the date. So this is gonna be a fun video to edit. So DFOS's season 4 will end on July 17th. No wait, that's not right either. On July 7th. It'll end on July 7th. It's the Thursday before the road trip to G-Fest begins. So again, shorter season than SOS's, which ends after G-Fest, but again, we do more in that time span, so it's a longer season despite the fact that it's technically shorter. So, more podcasts. So, that's basically it for DFOS. I'm just glancing at my notes here to see how much else I have to get into. And I'm about ready to wrap up. So, that's all the changes that I wanted to get into about the podcast. So the seasons, when they'll start, when they'll end, and all of that good information that will become prevalent in about a month or so. So I'm really excited to bring back the podcast, guys. I'm really excited to start with this new format. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think we'll produce some fun stuff along the way. So I'm very, very excited. But to get into some solo stuff, because I do also want to start doing solo videos on the rig again, because I haven't done that in a long time, mainly because of the podcast and because of how much effort I have to put into, or willing to put into that, and it just becomes less and less exciting or favorable to do solo videos because of all the group stuff you do. So that definitely happened to me. I'm going to try and do more solo stuff. I don't have dates set like I do for the podcast. For the return of my solo stuff, but I can pretty much guarantee it's going to be before the podcast come back. So I would say early to mid-September, I'll start putting regular solo videos out again. And that'll just be because, man, I miss doing them. Despite all the bitching that we do really enjoy it, and it feels weird to not do it. Whenever I watch or read something, I'm just like, what am I going to say when I review this? And I haven't felt that way in a while. For Fantastic Four, I made an exception, though, because I was like, I know what I'm going to say about this piece of shit. So I'd like to do that with everything again. So it has actually been weird and hard to sort of resist the urge to produce solo videos during this little hiatus of mine, but I'm going to continue to fight that urge in order to quench that excitement till finally I unleash it upon the YouTube world. So that's going to be early to mid-September when I start doing solo videos again. I don't have any particulars on what I'm going to be reviewing or doing or whatever, but I do have a solo video or solo series in mind for this November. But we'll get into that in a few minutes. I just wanted to say before I end that if you guys have any ideas for things that you would like me to do differently on the channel, on the SOS network, the podcasts, anything that you'd like to be different, anything that you think should be changed, or if there's anything you'd like us to do or review, or for me to do a review as a solo video, please leave those down in the comments. We do read those, despite the fact that doesn't always seem to be true. I'm going to start reading those more too, I promise. I don't ignore them intentionally, but the way YouTube comments are set up now, it's kind of, I have to put some effort into it to really read them in full. So sometimes I just don't. I'll see the beginning and I'm like, oh, that's nice, and then I'll stop. If it's exceptional, then I'll really look at it, but more often than not I get a little lazy. So I'm going to try not to do that because I want to start interacting with you guys more in the comments, and I would love it if you guys would give your input on what you'd like to see me do, because ultimately trying to satisfy the people who enjoy your work is ultimately what anybody tries to do. So that's what I'm setting out to do with all these changes and with all the other stuff. So I'm exhausted. I apologize. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier as to why I took the hiatus, but Jesus Christ, I'm tired. So I won't feel that way when I come back, I promise. I will feel much better. But I need to take a nap. So anyway, so if you would like to leave anything down in the comments, please do. I promise for this video, I'll read all of them. So leave some helpful suggestions down there. Or if there's anything you'd like to see me review or do, I will take that into consideration. And if I like it, I might just do it. I kind of just stole that part from Dylan with Kaiju Spotlight, but whatever. He doesn't have no copyright. That boy can sue me if he wants. Go ahead, Dylan. I dare you. Sue me. No, because then I'll end up reviewing another Gay Eddie movie, and I don't really want to do that. So anyway, that's going to do it for this video. But again, regardless of the fact that I don't have any planned solo videos for my return to YouTube, I do know that I'm finally going to do something that I've been planning for years and that you guys have seemed to want me to do for years. And I think this year is the year to do it. So, let's give a little preview for this planned solo series.
Allá, viene una tormenta.
What did he just say?
He said there's a storm coming in.